Cree Cafaro, a Democrat, standing by to react to all of the news. But first, as I mentioned, let's get straight to our headliner, exclusive Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Nice to be with you, Ed.
So Republican Lindsey Graham, as you know, chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's now opened this investigation on Burisma and Hunter Biden, maybe Joe Biden, the former vice president. I'm sure that's music to your ears. You've been talking about this for a long time. You've just written a letter to Lindsey Graham. I've got it here, asking that he help you get 3 Ukrainians who want visas to come to America to testify about Burisma. What would they say about Burisma and Hunter Biden?
Well, you know, it's real simple. This case has been real simple from the day that Joe Biden confessed to committing bribery back in January of 2018, and the Council on Foreign Relations didn't note anything about it, although he said precisely what was attributed to President Trump a year and a half later that caused all sorts of... Basically, they'll prove that he committed bribery. The crime of bribery is offering something of value to a public official for official action. Okay, here's what Joe Biden says he did. He offered him a $1 billion loan guarantee. He threatened him with a $1 billion loan guarantee. There were headlines in the New York Times, the Washington Post, calls for impeachment. It's the same thing, Ed.
Okay, on that point, Mr. Mayor.
Except for the double standard that we have that's corrupting us.
Okay, so pardon me, the former vice president, has insisted it wasn't bribery, that the prosecutor he wanted fired was not investigating corruption enough. That's his case. And when presented with the idea that Lindsey Graham is now investigating all this, here's what the former vice president told CNN. I'll let you react.
He's got a real tough road for re-election. Trump is now essentially holding power over him that even the Ukrainians would kneel to. Lindsey is about to go down in a way that I think he's going to regret his whole life.
Your reaction?
Sounds like a poor imitation of The Godfather. I mean, this is the guy who sent out a decree that they should keep me off television. He every other week he wants to get into a fist fight with the president. When he's asked about all of these conflicts and all this money made by his family selling his office, he says, I don't know my family's business. He says it so often, he's starting to sound like Kate Corleone in The Godfather. I mean, the reality is you'd have to be a fool to think he didn't know that his son was under investigation.
Okay, so he says there's
nothing. And if Joe Biden, I don't care what he said, he's lying.
Okay.
He's been lying all his life. The guy's been a corrupt politician since the brother got phony loans when he was in the Senate. Every place that Joe Biden was a point man, appointed by Obama, the Biden family came away with millions.
Okay, you've talked about that.
Nobody
Romania,
wants to look at it
China.
Because the Washington press corps.
Okay, well, we're talking about it
protects
now.
him.
Okay, but so I want to ask you then. I talked about your letter. You want 3 Ukrainians to come to America and testify.
4.
4 of them now. Okay, in the letter I saw 3. So by the same push of transparency, are you willing to have Lev Parnas, your former associate, who's now been indicted, come and either testify to Adam Schiff or Lindsey Graham in the interest of fairness?
It's up to him. I can't tell him to do it. I don't represent him. As far as I'm concerned, he could testify to everything he did, and it was perfectly appropriate, perfectly normal. He has said a few things lately that are completely untrue and provably untrue. So I don't know what he's doing. I mean, he claims that we had a meeting with the president at the Hanukkah party in December of 2018. Somebody should remind Lev that there were 5 witnesses, including his good friend Igor Fruman, who all say categorically untrue, provable by records. He's trying to make himself very important. We never had that meeting with the president. He just made it up.
So you never met with the president, Lev Parnas, at that Hanukkah party? You're saying you never met?
Actually, what I did was I introduced the 2 of them to the president. They took a 1-minute picture. They walked away. And what he said was we had a private, long meeting in which the president instructed him to do things. False, untrue, provable by the testimony of 5 witnesses.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, overnight.
So if he wants to do that, he could make himself into another Michael Cohen. I don't know what's going on. His lawyer makes these comments that are not only untrue, they're provably untrue with the testimony of witnesses and documents. He's getting very...
Met with Devin Nunes, the Republican who's the top Republican on the Intel Committee, you know well. Met with this former Ukrainian prosecutor general, Viktor Shokin, in Vienna, and that this happened last December. Do you know anything about that meeting? Devin Nunes is denying it. Did Devin Nunes meet with him?
Poor Lev. I don't know what he's doing to himself. I think, once again, that's going to be shown to be provably untrue. I do not believe that Devin Nunes met with. He did a good job.
Okay,
but they weren't investigators, and they weren't James Bond.
Right.
And they didn't have personal communications with the president. Igor Fruman would testify to that. And for some reason, Lev has got himself into, by the ambassador, being covered up by the State Department.
Yeah.
And not being investigated by the FBI or the Justice Department.
Okay, real quick.
He had every right to talk to him. In fact, it would have been his duty to. So I have no idea why this lawyer is creating these additional problems
Right.
for Lev. They're not problems for me because there's so many witnesses and documents to prove he's lying. That's why I hate to see.
Sure.
I do this for a living,
Right.
and I hate to see a lawyer do this to somebody.
Okay, you said it's not going to hurt you. Are you afraid, Mr. Mayor, that you could be indicted?
Oh, wow. But how long have you known me, Ed?
I've known you several years.
You think I'm afraid?
I don't
You
know.
think I get afraid?
Well,
I did the right thing. I represented my client in a very, very effective way. I was so effective that I discovered a pattern of corruption that the Washington press has been covering up for 3 or 4 years. You should have jumped all over this in 2015 when this awful conflict was mentioned.
Sure.
And it was hidden and suppressed by the Washington press.
But you know
the
that-
reality is I'm embarrassing you because you didn't do your job. And I'm also going to bring out a pay-for-play scheme in the Obama administration that will be devastating to the Democrat Party.
Okay.
I expected the moment I heard Biden's name.
Sure.
I told my colleagues they're going to try to kill me because they're going to kill the messenger. But damn it, the mafia couldn't kill me.
Right.
Your colleagues are not going to kill me.
Okay, so the Wall Street Journal, though, has reported that you were going to personally profit from a natural gas pipeline in Ukraine, and that's being investigated. You're laughing it off. Were you going to
I'm laughing it off because it's not true.
Okay.
It is completely false. I have no financial interest in the Ukraine. I'm not going to financially profit from anything that I know of in the Ukraine. If they know of it, I would probably have to disclose it to my hopefully soon-to-be ex-wife because she would get half of it. So, look, if I have no business interest in Ukraine.
Sure.
It is untrue. It is false. It isn't the first time the Wall Street Journal has printed false information. I can't keep up with the amount of false information printed about me.
So let's get to some facts.
I am telling you, if I were representing a terrorist and they were doing this to me because they didn't like my client, all you guys would be promoting me as a hero and a victim of what is, in fact, a concerted effort by the press to destroy me.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not painting you as a villain. Okay, I'm not painting you as a villain or a hero. We're just asking you the question. So I want to.
You're not going to get away with it. Let me make clear.
Yeah, real quick.
I have no business interest in the Ukraine.
Okay. So
the work I
let's
did
get
in
to
the
some
Ukraine
facts.
goes back several years.
Okay.
It's service work. I've been paid for it.
All right.
I was paid a reasonable amount. I got great praise for the work that. And I also note something else.
Yeah.
It was Zelensky who brought me up with President Trump, not President Trump.
Okay.
And that's because of my reputation in the Ukraine.
Have you talked to President Trump in the last week or two? Have you met with him? Are you still his counsel?
I do not discuss my conversations with my client. You can assume that I talk to him early and often.
Yeah.
And have a very, very good relationship with him. And all of these comments, which are totally insulting.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen things written like, he's going to throw me under the bus.
Right.
When they say that, I say, he isn't, but I have insurance. I mean,
Okay.
It's ridiculous. We are very good friends. He knows what I did was in order to defend him, not to dig up dirt on Biden. This goes back a year ago before Biden hadn't even decided to run for president. My thought when I began investigating this was to get evidence that will help my client prove that the charges against him are untrue. And they do prove it. In fact, they're ultimately going to prove that this was a conspiracy to frame him, in which high-level Democrats participated, including some people in the White House.
So let's talk about the White House.
Hard to prove that. Hard to get that out in this city, where you got about a 90% hate Trump, vicious group of people who are investigating, what I did in high school.
Sure. Okay, John Bolton said you were a hand grenade, and he didn't want to be part of any drug deal that you and others.
First of all, he didn't say the drug deal about me. And get your facts straight.
Well, he said drug deal about people
inside
inside the White House, and he called you a hand grenade.
He said it about
And
Sondland
Mulvaney.
and Mick.
And Mick
He didn't say
Mulvaney.
the drug deal about, but equally ridiculous comment. First of all, for John to say I'm a hand grenade, well, then he's an atomic bomb. I mean, I know John for years, and he's been a friend of mine. I have no idea why he's saying this. John has no understanding of my role as a defense lawyer. I didn't go tell the White House what I was doing as a defense lawyer. I did it privately. What I did there had nothing to do with his foreign policy, good or bad. I didn't get involved in foreign policy. I was involved in gathering very, very significant evidence to exculpate my client.
Yeah.
And when I found the corruption that was being ignored by this corrupt press that we have, I became outraged. Remember, I spent my early career prosecuting hundreds of corruption cases against United States senators, commissioners, law enforcement people, Republicans, Democrats. I despise corrupt public officials.
So
that's why I was so successful in prosecuting them.
So what do you want to happen then? In your letter where we started with Lindsey Graham, you want these Ukrainians to come to America, you want to get visas. But what do you want, what's the key question you want answered about Hunter Biden and Burisma?
I want all the facts to come out. I want people to see the documents of the money laundered $3 million transaction that went to Hunter Biden, which in and of itself is the crime of money laundering. I've got the documents in my file. Nobody wants to look at them because everybody's covering up for them. They say that the charges were debunked. There's never been an investigation. Complete lie. They say there's no evidence of criminality. How can you say there's no evidence of criminality and Shokin has an affidavit saying it was bribery? You can say Shokin's not telling the truth, but you can't lie like the Washington Post does and say there's no evidence of criminality. There's Shokin, there's Kulyk, there's Kodanitsky, there's three conversations between Biden and Poroshenko, 3 of them.
Who was the
5
president
days.
at the time? Yeah, right after Burisma got investigated.
Right before Biden went to the Ukraine to get the guy fired.
All right.
Well, let's get the transcripts of those 3 conversations. I've had some leaked information that came through the press about what those conversations are about. And I'm willing to I won't bet.
Yeah.
That's illegal. But I'm willing to tell you, Joe Biden's not going to like those conversations.
Okay.
And if he wants you to believe that he didn't know about his son's business in the Ukraine, that can be disproven 10 ways.
Okay,
and
Mr.
that's
Mayor?
called a false exculpatory statement. If Joe Biden is not prosecuted for these crimes, then nobody in America should ever be prosecuted for bribery.
Mr. Mayor, we appreciate you giving us so much time today, answering tough questions.
It's an outrage. It's an outrage, the kind of protection that he gets. And the part that I really find disturbing is because the media puts on all of this vicious attack on you if you go after one of their protected people, people in law enforcement are afraid to go after
All
them.
right. Mr. Mayor, thanks for coming in. Happy Thanksgiving. Appreciate you coming in.
Happy Thanksgiving to you.
All right, let's bring in Republican Congressman Brad Wenstrup. As we mentioned, a member of the House Intel Committee. Congressman, appreciate you coming in. I want to start where we ended with the mayor because he has some tough questions for Hunter Biden and former Vice President Joe Biden. We played the clip earlier. Vice President Biden is upset. He says there's no there. But you and your Republican colleagues on the House Intel panel, as I understand it, have gotten these records that suggest there were, as the mayor suggested, a lot of phone calls between Vice President Biden, who was overseeing Ukrainian policy, and Poroshenko, who was the Ukrainian president, around the time that an investigation of Burisma began. Do you want some answers to that?
Well, you always want answers to questions like this, especially from the Intel Committee. We always want to know who, what, when, where, why, and how someone or some other country engaged and tried to cause harm within our country or influence our elections or anything along that line. As far as any specific phone calls, I can't talk about that at this point, as you can imagine.
Yeah. So there's a media narrative right now, and the mayor was just ripping into the media. He's not happy with the way he has been treated. But in terms of a narrative over the first 2 weeks of the impeachment hearings where you were front and center. And the narrative goes that these were 2 rough weeks for the president. You sat on the dais. What's your response to that?
Well, one of the things I said on the dais is I'm not an attorney and I'm not a prosecuting attorney, nor am I a defense attorney, but I was interested in finding facts. And let's take a look at those. One, first of all, we have the transcript of what the conversation was about, which is where this whole thing began. 2, there was no mention of aid in that. And 3, both parties agreed that there was no pressure applied. 4, aid was delivered. 5, there were no investigations launched by Zelensky. And then out of all the witnesses, they've all said they see no quid pro quo, no bribery, no extortion, and the only conversation that was actually had directly with the president was when he said there was no quid pro quo. But you know what we do know? We do know that the attorney for the whistleblower who started all this announced a coup against the president towards impeachment a couple of years ago. Those are the facts. So I don't know where you go as far as trying to impeach in this situation when you're just put together the facts and what witnesses have come forward to say. A lot of accusations, but if the whole thing is based on facts, I just don't see anything there.
All right, Congressman, let's look forward then, because you helped us look backwards. Let's look forward to what's next. My colleague Chris Wallace sat down with a senior administration official on Friday who was saying that the White House is not even sure that Democrats now, based on some of the things you just laid out and based on the political realities of maybe the country not being behind this in terms of a majority in supporting the Democrats, that the House Democrats may not even go forward with impeachment. First of all, do you think they will vote on articles of impeachment? And 2, Chris Wallace is reporting that people inside the White House now want a Senate trial because they want the president to have due process and they want to call in the whistleblower to testify you just mentioned. They want Adam Schiff and they want Hunter Biden to testify at a trial.
Yeah, well, I would go along with that. I mean, I wanted Adam Schiff to have to testify. I mean, he said he never heard of the whistleblower, didn't know the whistleblower, but his staffs met with the whistleblower. Nancy Pelosi announced that they were going to launch an impeachment inquiry before the complaint was even out there. So did she talk to the whistleblower? I mean, there's a lot of things in background to this whole thing coming forward that I'd want to know about, and the Senate seems to be the only place where we may be able to hear any of that. So I can see some of the logic coming from the White House to want to get to the bottom of the entire story.
And so last question on that, I put two in there, but the first one that I said, do you think Democrats are going to go forward with impeachment? Or when you see these polls that say a growing number of independent voters say, I just don't see this as an impeachable offense, might the Democrats walk back from the precipice?
They might. I mean, look, they pulled the word bribery to see if that would be a good word to use. So I think they pay attention to polls, and maybe they'll just try to do a censure or something like that. I honestly can't predict, because the whole thing has been very unpredictable, with very loose sets of rules throughout the entire thing from Adam Schiff.
Brad Wenstrup has been front and center, as I mentioned. Congressman, we appreciate you taking part of your weekend out with your family to be with us and our viewers and explain these big issues. We hope to have you back soon, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
All right, we're going to get reaction to all of this from the Democratic side, as promised. Stay with us right after the break.
I represented my client in a very, very effective way. The reality is I'm embarrassing you because you didn't do your job. And I'm also going to bring out a pay-for-play scheme in the Obama administration that will be devastating to the Democrat Party. I expected, the moment I heard Biden's name, I told my colleagues they're going to try to kill me because they're going to kill the messenger. But damn it, the mafia couldn't kill me. Your colleagues are not going to kill me.
Damn it, the mafia didn't kill me, Rudy Giuliani says. What an interview that he just gave us. A long one, and we're going to break it all down. That was the president's personal attorney, obviously, moments ago in an exclusive here on Fox. Let's get some perspective, as we promised, from the Democratic side. Capri Cafaro, former Ohio State Senator and Ohio Senate Minority Leader. Good to see you today. Thanks for coming in.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Capri, you're kind of a more moderate Democrat who hails from a battleground state of Ohio, as I mentioned. Let's start with the mayor. What do you make of what he's saying about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden in his defense of the president?
Well, what I would say is this, is that, if Rudy Giuliani is so concerned, and as you mentioned, Ed, I mean, I try to be fair regardless of what party is involved in the process here. But it seems to me that it's not the media's job necessarily to hold anyone accountable in the court of law, so to speak, maybe the court of public opinion. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that Rudy Giuliani, particularly being a former very successful prosecutor, should instead go directly to the Department of Justice. If these are issues of corruption that are, and money laundering, as he claims, then they rise to the level of seriousness that the department
say, this is improper in some way. You just said bring it to the Justice Department. Mayor Giuliani says he's been trying to bring these facts about Joe and Hunter Biden out there, and nobody wants to pay attention.
Well, then my question would be, it's the Trump administration, State Department and Justice Department, and why aren't they acting? I mean, Rudy Giuliani is not testifying in front of Congress. He hasn't, gone before the Intelligence Committee. I would surmise that he's not going to go in front of the Judiciary Committee as they go through this, process of trying to put together articles of impeachment. So why aren't they acting? It seems like it's up to them, and I can't speak to why the Trump administration's, State Department and Department of Justice are not acting unless they're concerned about political optics.
All right, I've got a minute and a half. I want to break this down. Number one, give you a fair chance. Brad Wenstrup, the Republican from the Intel panel, said that it was a bad week for Democrats. What's your case that this was a chance for Democrats to show some facts that are not good for the president?
Sure. Well, I mean, I would say that Ambassador Sondland and what he has, basically presented, if nothing else, the potential of a quid pro quo of, connecting the Ukrainian aid, at least to a White House meeting between President Trump and the Ukrainian president. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he basically said that everybody was in on it, that certainly is not a good look. I would also suggest that, Dr. Hill and the other individual that overheard the call, where there was President Trump was speaking to Ambassador Sondland. I mean, those were very, very credible witnesses that basically said that this is very bad. Now, there is a difference between impropriety, unethical behavior, and something that rises to the level of impeachment and high crimes and misdemeanors. And that continues to be the challenge the Democrats have. And public opinion is not necessarily breaking for them, even with what I think are not positive things to come out for the president in these hearings.
So it may be difficult for Democrats to actually go forward with the articles of impeachment. We're going to see how it plays out. Capri Cafaro, we're glad you came in today. We hope you come back soon.
Anytime. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. A new report out, meanwhile, from the CDC. We talked about at the top some substantive issues. This is about the number of deaths.
You watch Prohibition, you look at, with the alcohol, you look at cigarettes, you look at all. If you don't give it to them, it's going to come here illegally. Okay? They're going to make it. But instead of Reynolds or Juul or, legitimate companies, good companies making something that's safe, they're going to be selling stuff on a street corner that could be horrible. That's the one problem I can't seem to forget.
President Trump yesterday addressing the important issue of the rise in deaths and illnesses from e-cigarettes, but warning a ban on flavored vaping products could pose an even greater health risk to kids. The CDC reports 47 vaping-related deaths in 25 states in Washington, D.C. Joining me now live is Joe Grogan. He is Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy. Joe, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, Ed. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
I want to talk about this crisis and very quickly show you something that the president of the American Medical Association said, I think you have the opportunity to save a generation from addiction. We know that the youth are attracted to these flavored e-cigs, and to those who argue that e-cigs are effective smoking cessation, the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force has not found that evidence. So my question to you is, the president hinted weeks ago that he might want to ban these flavored e-cigs, and yesterday was saying something different. So how do you balance all this?
Well, I think what the American people saw yesterday is a president who's focused on policy issues and focused on the American people's agenda. Problem. Everybody in the room, including companies who market flavored products or used to market flavored now before he makes a decision. It's a pleasure to work for this president as he works through policy issues. It's a pleasure to give him options. And the American people should be very gratified that we are out there every day working to advance a policy agenda for the American people while the D.C. media is focused solely on impeachment.
Absolutely. We talked at the top about important issues. Another one being lowering the price of prescription drugs. The president has talked a lot about that. You have as well. But I want to read something for you from the Wall Street Journal. They just took a look at it and said record numbers of generic drugs for cancer, heart ailments, and other conditions have received U.S. approval in recent years, raising hopes that competition would reduce high drug costs. But many of the lower-priced medicines have not hit the market. A Wall Street Journal review found the result: many patients forced to take high-priced medicines, and a widely touted remedy for reining in drug costs has failed to live up to its promise. Another big issue. It affects a lot of our viewers. What's the president going to do about it?
Well, the president has seen under his leadership record number of generic drug approvals out of the FDA. When we came into office, there was a huge backlog of generic drug approvals at the FDA. Under the president's direction, that backlog has been cleared, and we've seen record number of generic approvals at a time of declining patent expirations. Because of the president's leadership, we actually have year-over-year price declines for drug prices for the first time in 50 years. Now, what the president is focused on now is working on a bipartisan legislative package to get prices even lower, wringing inefficiencies out of the system, and having greater uptake of generic drugs to lower prices for the American people at the pharmacy counter and for the American taxpayers. That's why he's working with Senator Grassley and Wyden, Republican and Democrat, to get a bipartisan solution for the American people. And there's a real opportunity.
He's complained it's hard to get Democrats working with him on any of these big issues. Last question, our veterans. We're coming up on Thanksgiving. We want to be thankful of a lot of people, but our veterans in particular. I mentioned a minute ago veteran suicide. The rates are just despicable. We've got to do something about it. Give us 30 seconds on what the president wants to do to help.
Well, the president is absolutely committed to our nation's veterans. He campaigned on the issue. He's charged Secretary Wilkie at the VA to give veterans everything they need. We've passed the Mission Act to put veterans at the center of care at the VA. We've got over 2.2 million community care visits since the Mission Act was launched in June. We're instituting universal screening for mental health with veterans coming into care. The tempo of visits between veterans and our medical professionals has increased, and we're working on a comprehensive report, multi-agency, with a task force that the president set up by executive order, which I co-chair with Secretary Wilkie, to get those numbers down. But they have been unacceptable for far too long, and this president's commitment to our nation's veterans is absolute.
Well, Joe Grogan, we're committed to bringing a lot of other issues to the table. We're glad to know you got a big job. You're covering a lot of this. We hope you'll be a frequent visitor in the days ahead so that our viewers can get an idea of what else the president's working on. Thanks for coming in, Joe.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. In the meantime, public impeachment testimony this week from the EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland. It implicated not just the president, but other top officials over Ukraine. But my next guest is one of those mentioned in Sondland's testimony. My exclusive with the outgoing Energy Secretary Rick Perry, who insists that Sondland was wrong. That is next. Now to my sit down with the Energy Secretary, Rick Perry. He's stepping down in a couple of weeks after serving President Trump for about 3 years. We talked about the work he's done and the 2020 race for the White House. But we started with the impeachment inquiry and testimony from EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland this week, who testified that Perry and others were read in on the push to get Burisma investigated. In this exclusive, the Secretary sharply denies that, tells his side of the story, and says if Democrats believe they're getting the president removed from office, think again. Ambassador Sondland goes up there to these impeachment hearings and invokes your name and testifies under oath that you were more read in on the president pushing for the investigation of the Bidens than you've let on.
Yeah. The record's very clear. I've talked about this from the get-go, that I knew exactly what we've been talking about. We've been talking about corruption. We've been talking about unbundling of NAFTA gas. We've been talking about both with Poroshenko before Zelensky ever got into office. We had these same conversations. They have to unbundle. You have to have the rule of law. You must make sure that there's not corruption going on in your government if you expect Americans to come and to invest here and help your country get away from that Russian influence of their gas. That's been the story day after day. Not once was the name Burisma or the Bidens mentioned to me, not by the president, not by Rudy Giuliani, and not by Gordon Sondland. And if there's anyone saying anything different, then they're surmising, and that's not a wise thing to do. I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I stand by my statements that I made all along, and will continue to.
So, you've been around politics a long time. How do you see this ending for the president?
Well, I think the president will muscle right on through this. He is an extraordinary individual to stay focused and disciplined from the standpoint of, we got a mission here, and we're going to get through it, and we're going to make this happen. And, I don't see the American people buying into this thing.
Do you see any chance the Republicans remove him from office in the Senate?
Oh, Lord, no.
Your critics would say you don't care about the environment.
I like to tell people that this administration, in the first 2 years of this administration, we spent more money on renewable energy than the previous administration in their last 2 years. We increased the budget of our national labs by 43%, and a lot of that goes towards technologies, the National Energy Renewable Lab. But here's what's most important. Because this president understood that American LNG could really impact the emissions issue in Europe. And he basically said, I want you to go sell LNG like the world looks flat. Go get this done. Here's what he said when I was sitting in his office getting interviewed back in December of 2016. He said, Perry, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go do for American Energy what you did for Texas. And I said, I got it, Mr. President. And that's what we've done. We're selling American LNG now into 36 different countries on 5 continents. The Europeans saved $8 billion last year because American LNG and the competition it brought to the market over there against Russian gas. Not only are they not held hostage by Russian gas, they're also saving money. Americans, because of the shale revolution, over $200 billion saved last year. And you do the math on that for a family of 4, it's about $2,500 a year that Americans saved because of the regulations and the taxes that basically said to the in this case the fossil fuel industry, go out there and develop this, and they have. Here's the result. Our emissions are lower than any country that's a signatory to that Paris Agreement. Our emissions are back down to the same levels that we had in, I believe, 1987, energy-related emissions. That's a good story.
What do you see when you look across at the Democrats? They had another debate last night. You've been through this, as you say, a few times.
I hear too many people talking about, if you vote for me, here's what I'll give you. Free. I think there's a TV ad that says that, isn't it? I don't know what they're giving away free. There are no free lunches. Stuff costs. We need to get this country focused on how blessed we are today to have the resources that we have, to have the freedoms that we have, and don't let them get away from us.
I want to figure out where you're going next, but when I got into your office and I saw that pillow with Davy Crockett, what's it saying? You all can go to hell, I'm going to Texas?
So Davy Crockett was elected 2 times to Congress from Tennessee, and the 3rd time he got defeated. And he went to Jackson, Tennessee. Lamar Alexander and I were just talking about this a couple days ago. He went to a little courthouse in Jackson, Tennessee, and stood up on the courthouse and he said, you know, sure enjoyed working for you. But he said, you all may go to hell. I'm going to Texas.
You're going to do something similar? You're going to go to Capitol Hill or go to the White House?
No, I'm not going to tell anybody to go to hell. I've enjoyed it. It's been an incredible 3 years of working up here, and I love my wife and I love Texas.
You can catch part 2 of my interview with Secretary Perry right here on Sunday. He opens up about his faith.
I mean, imagine being fired by your mother. Apparently, Queen Elizabeth thought the royal scandal could so tarnish the rest of the household, the only option was to distance the family from Prince Andrew, at least in their official capacity, with Prince Andrew when she was underage. Andrew tried to debunk her claims, saying he had a bizarre medical condition, but several newspapers found evidence to the contrary. Meantime, U.S. Attorney General William Barr finally speaking on Epstein's manner of death, saying even he had doubts about suicide, but the investigation showed otherwise. Barr saying that he understood people who thought it was maybe something else, but it was a perfect storm.
He's staying on the case, and so will we. Thank you, Jackie. That does it for me. Catch me on Gutfeld tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be right back here tomorrow at noon. Until then.
Rudy Giuliani is sounding off on the impeachment inquiry today, saying in an exclusive interview with Fox that he is not afraid of being indicted. This comes just one day after President Trump defended his attorney's involvement in Ukraine. And welcome to America's News Headquarters from Washington. I'm Kristen Fisher.
Over the past week, we've gotten that reporting that there are federal prosecutors looking into Giuliani's links to the Ukraine and some gas and energy projects there. We'll get into that. I'm Leland Vittert. President Trump also saying that he would welcome an impeachment trial in the Senate, where the Republicans hold the majority and would set the rules. Mark Meredith, North Lawn of the White House, with all of that as the president is in town this weekend. Hi, Mark.
And good afternoon to you, Leland. As you mentioned, President Trump continues to insist that the impeachment inquiry is a witch hunt and it's a hoax. And while the White House says it is focused on other things like trade as well as policies here closer to home, it's also, as you mentioned, we're hearing from the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who was asked about what's been happening behind the scenes with his involvement with Ukraine. Now, we got some news documents.
I've known you several years.
You think I'm afraid?
I don't know.
You think I get afraid?
Well,
I did the right thing. I represented my client in a very, very effective way. I was so effective that I discovered a pattern of corruption that the Washington press has been covering up for 3 or 4 years.
Giuliani continued to blame the press corps, saying that the administration has been trying to tell people what's been happening behind the scenes, but that story has not been getting out there. Ed also had a chance to ask the former New York City mayor about his thoughts about the former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, someone who lawmakers up on Capitol Hill are eager to hear from. Here's what Giuliani had to say.
Get your facts straight. For John to say I'm a hand grenade, well, then he's an atomic bomb.
The president spent much of this week pushing back against the testimony up on Capitol Hill. He continues, as I said, to mention that this inquiry is illegitimate. He accuses Democrats of playing unfairly. The president fired off a tweet first thing this morning. He wrote, quote, Adam Schiff will be compelled to testify should the Democrats decide, despite the fact that my presidential conversations were totally appropriate, perfect, to go forward with the impeachment hoax. Polls have now turned very strongly against impeachment. Now, a senior administration official tells Fox News that they believe that they are very confident going, if the House were to actually vote on impeachment, that they would have a very good chance in the Senate. The president also had a chance to meet face-to-face with 2 Republican senators earlier this week. And the White House continues to insist on its message that it's focused on the economy, it's focused on jobs. Leland and Kristen, it'll be interesting to see how the White House moves forward along with the Thanksgiving week. Guys.
We'll get some more of that messaging throughout the week. Mark Meredith, thank you very much. Kristen?
Well, as Congress heads home for recess, the next steps in the impeachment inquiry remain a bit unclear, but some members of the House Judiciary Committee say that they expect to see movement after the Thanksgiving holiday. So our Garrett Tenney is here live with more. So Garrett, after all those public hearings, what can we expect to see next?
Well, there's a lot that we could see over the next few weeks, but a lot of it remains unclear, like you mentioned. It is going to be a busy holiday season for sure, though, up on Capitol Hill. The Intelligence Committee, for instance, could still announce additional hearings or depositions. If it doesn't, though, the next step is to put together a report for the Judiciary Committee on what the investigation has found so far. From there, the Judiciary Committee could hold hearings of its own, or it could go ahead and start writing up the articles of impeachment. Fox is told the potential impeachment articles could include bribery, abuse of of power, contempt of Congress for the White House's efforts to block witnesses and testimony.
People who are deeply disturbed. They are being very cautious in their words. Their arms are being broken.
They might. I mean, look, they pulled the word bribery to see if that would be a good word to use. So I think they pay attention to polls, and maybe they'll just try to do a censure or something like that. I honestly can't predict because the whole thing has been very unpredictable with very loose sets of rules throughout the entire thing from Adam Schiff.
Capitol Hill, though, is that it would likely take place sometime in January or February. But again, there's still a lot that could happen between now and then.
Yeah, and if that drags on until January or February, it will just be so fascinating to watch and see what kind of impact that has on the 2020 race, because so many of the Democratic contenders would need to be back in Washington.
A lot of ripple effects.
For those hearings, yeah.
Something else is happening in January and February. February Iowa caucuses, right?
I believe
And New
so.
Hampshire as well.
Yeah.
There we go.
Nothing too big.
No,
Garrett, thank you.
haven't talked about that at all. All right, we're going to get to 2020 in a minute, but now for reaction to this week's House impeachment hearings and what we can expect next. Chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, the congressman from Washington State, frequent guest here on the show, Adam Smith. Nice to see you, sir. Appreciate it, as always. This is what Nancy Pelosi had to say back in March about impeachment. She said impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there is something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country, and he, meaning the president, is just not worth it. So overwhelming, compelling, and bipartisan. That doesn't seem to be working out so well.
But what changed dramatically since the speaker made those comments? And I think it makes it clear she's not anxious to do this. I'm not anxious to do this. There's a lot of other things we would prefer to work on. But when we saw what happened in Ukraine and when you saw the testimony from last week, the president is very clearly abusing his power. And for all the smokescreens, it's really clear what happened.
But if it's so clear,
I'm
why
sorry
is it
if I
not
could-
bipartisan?
Well, I can't speak for why Republicans are not choosing to see what's in front of their face. That's up to them. I think the biggest reason that it's not bipartisan is because this is the power that President Trump has over the Republican Party. And you've seen it. The only Republicans that have chosen to challenge Trump, and there have been quite a few, have stepped down from office, have decided not to run again because they don't think they can win a primary if they take on the president. I think that's the biggest reason.
So,
but if you
okay.
look at the fact, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You guys have had 30 plus hours of hearings, called any witnesses that Adam Schiff wanted. And still the polling is upside down on impeachment. Latest Emerson polls, +2 for the president staying in office. In Wisconsin, it's 53-40 in favor of the president staying in office. It's not just Republicans in Congress. It doesn't seem as though the American people are convinced either.
Well, I can't speak to the polling data. The polling data has been split. But don't forget about the facts, which I would like to try to explain here. The president sent Rudy Giuliani to Ukraine. Originally, he sent him there to establish that Russia hadn't interfered in our election. It had really been Ukraine. And this, by the way, was pointed out this week, is Russian propaganda. Russia is working to undermine democracy in this country and throughout Europe. The fact that the president doesn't acknowledge that is...
with Russia. Doing
I'm
that.
sorry?
I said I don't think there's any arguments in terms of that Russia's doing that.
Actually, there is an argument. The president of the United States refuses to acknowledge that happened. And right now,
so that's what you're impeaching for?
I'm sorry. Can I finish a point? And right now, what we're trying to do in the defense bill is put in place an election security provision to prevent or to hold Russia accountable if they try to do it in 2020. And that provision is being blocked by Senate Republicans. So there is not an effort to hold the president accountable. And that's why many Democrats, like me, I don't want to go down the impeachment road. I certainly didn't want to go down there prior to what happened in Ukraine. But if the president is turning a blind eye to Russian interference and is more focused on his political interests as he was in Ukraine, this is a threat to national security. This is a case that we have to make to the American people.
I understand you're making it to the American people, but my question remains, if you're making it to the American people and after 30 hours of hearings, there is not this overwhelming bipartisan view either from voters or Republicans. So I'm wondering, what about the message that Democrats are selling isn't the American people and independent voters buying?
Right. And first of all, I don't necessarily buy as to where the American people are or are not. There have been many polls that have had support for impeachment in the mid-50s, which is pretty...
plus 2 or 3 points. We're not talking about Watergate when it was 75%.
Understood, but that's a pretty remarkable statistic in our divided political environment. And you're
It's remarkable that half the people agree to something?
I'm sorry, but I try to be fair in these interviews, but if I can't get more than 4 or 5 words out, let me just try this.
this is an incredibly important issue. If the president, which you guys don't want to talk about at all, if the president has actually done what we have said he's done, and about 12 witnesses said he really did do exactly what we thought he did, which was basically leverage taxpayer money to try to pressure Ukraine into doing investigations to serve his personal political purposes, that is an incredible threat to our democracy, and I'm not going to turn a blind eye to that.
Okay, so Congressman, just to button it up, because we only got about 15 seconds, I take what you're saying is that today you are a yes on a vote to impeach whatever articles may or may not come out of it.
I want to see what the articles of impeachment are. I'm not going to say I'm yes for something that hasn't even been put up yet. But I am deeply concerned about it. And I'm deeply concerned about the fact that this whole discussion, you just completely ignore what happened, which is really kind of
we had 30 hours of
important.
hearings.
And I have to, I mean, if you guys out there spinning it this way, it's no wonder we're
spinning it. Always said you had 30 hours. All right, Congressman, we appreciate it. When you make a decision on your vote, come back and tell us, all right?
Happy to.
Thank you, sir. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. Kristen?
You as well.
All right, now for the Republican perspective, let's bring in Tennessee Senator and member of the Senate Judiciary and Senate Armed Services Committee, Marsha Blackburn. Senator, out of all of the public hearing that we've heard over the last 2 weeks, did you hear anything that might make you change your mind and side with Democrats on impeachment?
I have not heard anything that would make me change my mind, because you've heard witness after witness say there's nothing that rises to the level of impeachment. There's no quid pro quo, there's not extortion, there's not bribery. And what we know is that the Democrats have been on this for 3 years. They said they were going to impeach Donald Trump. We're coming up on an election. They haven't done it yet. They are searching for anything to hang their hat on. And as you just heard my friend Adam Smith say, they are waiting to see what the articles of impeachment are going to be. And I have to tell you, this is very different from what transpired around Bill Clinton, what transpired around Richard Nixon.
So you say there's nothing that rises to the level of impeachment in your view, but is there anything that you learned from these impeachment hearings in terms of the president's behavior or some of the people that work with the president that you have a problem with?
We're always watching to make certain that people are abiding by, on our side over in the legislative branch, congressional ethics. And we know that the Office of Ethics there at the White House monitors very closely. And they watch communications, they watch what people say, and we know that they are a part of this process.
So you're okay with all of the president's actions?
We can disagree with a policy, we can disagree with words, but what we do know is that there is nothing that arises to the level of impeachment.
I'd like to ask you about one of the witnesses in particular that testified this week, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, and you had something to say about him on Twitter yesterday that's getting a lot of play. Let's just read it right now. You said, "Vindictive Vindman is the whistleblower's handler." That got a lot of play on Twitter. Democratic congressman from Virginia said in response to that tweet, quote, "It's Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, and you don't know anything about the whistleblower. Senator, ignorant, disgraceful comments attacking heroes who put on the uniform do not help anyone." Your response to that, and do you stand by your tweet?
I do stand by my tweet, and as a conservative...
Vindman is the whistleblower's handler, but Vindman testified under oath that he does not know who the whistleblower is. So this is a serious point, because you're essentially accusing him of perhaps committing a crime, perjury, lying under oath. Are you saying that Lieutenant Colonel Vindman was lying?
When you listen